And I'd like to welcome you to Shiloh, or Shiloh, how we would pronounce it in English. We're actually going to be spending 2 weeks here in Shiloh, or Shiloh, partially because Shiloh has a history that's over 400 years in Israel. It's massive. And although it's noticed throughout the Bible, not many people really deal with it. Not many pastors or Bible studies. And so we're going to take 2 weeks and we're going to discuss this place called Shiloh. Tonight is primarily going to be a rabbit trail. This is rabbit trails through Israel, and tonight especially, we're just going to be going down the rabbit trail if we ever get back. I doubt it. We're doing that so that next week we can deal with the archaeology that's been found here at Shiloh. But I would like us to have in our minds, through the rabbit trail, next week when we come into this, as I'm talking about the archaeology, you're not seeing a bunch of stones. You're seeing what they saw for 400 years. And so that's why tonight is going to be a rabbit trail. Here we are in our archaeology, and our little archaeologist. We've moved him up just a little bit because now we are going to be somewhere between the 1500 BC mark all the way now into the Davidic layer, King David into the 1000-year mark. Because this place covers all of it. Here's one of my favorite photos. Of all of the ones that we took in Israel. This is my dad and I, and we are standing at a gate at the entrance of Shiloh. And it's probably the nicest looking one of the both of us together, but it was just fantastic to be able to share the whole trip for sure, but to be able to share this with my dad. And so this is, that's one of my favorite pictures. What importance, I should say, does Shiloh have in the Old Testament? This is actually the archaeological dig part of it, one side of it. What significance does it have in the Bible? Does anybody remember? No? It does have something to do with King David, and it goes before King David as well. Maybe this will give you a little bit of a hint. On this picture, you can see way up here at the top, barely, there is Mount Gerizim, the Mount of Cursing. There's Mount Ebal. Sorry, I said that backwards. The Mount of Blessing is Mount Gerizim. The Mount of Cursing is Mount Ebal. That's what we talked about last week with that little curse tablet and the altar that they found of Joshua. Okay? So they came through. You can't see it because of my verses here. But the Israelites came through somewhere right in here. And then right there's about where I is. And then they went up here and they did the blessings and the cursings. That's what we talked about last week. Here's Sychar. This is where, remember, Samaria is. There's Jacob's well. Okay. Way down here is Jerusalem. And stuck in the middle, pretty much in the middle of Israel, is this little town of Shiloh. Judges chapter 21 verse 19 said, "They said, Behold, there is a feast of Yahweh from year to year in Shiloh, which is on the north side of Bethel." Okay? It's on east side of the highway. That's the highway there. And then it's on the east side of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem. And on the south side of Libnah. And right there's Libnah. And here's this little place of Shiloh. Do you have any better idea of what Shiloh's importance was for 400 years? If Judges 21 tells you there was a feast to Yahweh there every year. Anybody got an idea now? Did that hint help you?
Is that where the tent was?
That's exactly right. This is where the tabernacle stayed for 400 years. 400. Now you see our little map over here in the timeline, and we've kind of bounced from Abraham down to Moses to Joshua. Now we're moving past Joshua and the conquest to being settled in the Promised Land. 3 times a year for 359 years, the children of Israel would come to Shiloh to celebrate the feasts of the Lord.
Is that Gibeon also?
I'm not sure. It may have been. It may have been. Well, it was. Yes, it was for a time after they lost it to the Philistines. Yeah, it did go there. You are, yes. But up until Eli, which we will talk about next week, the priest Eli, it was in Shiloh itself. Okay, so there, that is what the tabernacle looked like. This is not the temple. The tabernacle was a movable tent that they made while they were in the wilderness, and it followed them around. Every place that they went to camp, they would put that in the middle, and then you remember they went on the compass directions, each tribe, to the north, to the south, to the east, and the west. Okay? At the feasts of Passover, or Shavuot, or weeks, what we would call Pentecost, and the Feast of Tabernacles, or Booths, the Jews were commanded to come to the temple or the tabernacle, and this time we're talking about the tabernacle, and they would come to worship. They would come to repent of their sins, they would come to worship the Lord, and they would come to celebrate. Tonight, we're not going to be going through the feasts of Moses. Although Jesus fulfills all of them in dramatic, amazing fashion, we don't have time for any of that tonight. that takes several weeks in and of itself. Now, if you want more information about that, about 5 years ago, I did a study on it, and maybe we'll do it again at some point. But we did do it on our Sunday nights about 5 years ago. But I would strongly encourage you, as a help to this little study tonight, to go back and study the Mosaic feasts and how Jesus fulfills them, because it's beautiful. It's just beautiful. Tonight, we're going to be talking all about the tabernacle. Now, this is a really interesting photo. It's somebody's feet. Actually, I'm not taking a picture of the man's feet. I'm taking a picture of what he's standing on. They were looking for Shiloh because it has 400 years of Jewish history here. Okay? When they were searching for it, they found that passage in Judges chapter 21, and so they know the general area, and they're looking around, they're searching. There's a current city of Shiloh that's there, and they're looking, and they come across this place that's a tell. It's several layers of history, and they start digging, and they find all kinds of pottery. And I'm not just saying immense amounts of pottery. Literally 50, I quoted the guy, 50 times as much broken pottery found at Shiloh as any other excavation site in all of Israel. It's astronomical. Daniel, would you do me a favor? Go out to my car. I believe it's in my passenger seat, or it's behind my seat. There's a little bag, and it's got a bunch of pottery in it. Would you bring that in, please? Daniel's going to go get it. I have a bag that's pieces of pottery. Literally a couple of them that are right here where the guy's standing on. Over here, you have limestone gravel. That's what we see every day. But do you see the discoloration and the more triangular shapes over here? He's telling us this story that they found so much of this pottery. And as he's saying it, I'm looking around at the scenery, and I look down, and you know, when you're in Israel, you want to find something that's several thousand years old. That's pretty cool. As he's talking about finding all this pottery, I look down, and no joke, an area of at least 2 feet in circle is all pottery. What he's standing on is practically all broken pottery. You say, who cares? Just pass it around. Open it up, pass it around, and look at them. And notice there's differences in the style, the color, how it's shaped. And that actually would tell an archaeologist, not like myself, it would tell them the time period of when that was made. Now, how and why this is so important that they found 50 times the amount of pottery, they went to a rabbi and they said, we don't understand. We can't figure out why we're finding so much pottery around this hill. And the rabbi gets blessed and he gets all excited. He says, I can tell you why. Because 3 times a year for 395 years, families were required to bring meals, sacrifices, and their family to camp out around the tabernacle. The reason I had a nice chicken shawarma meal tonight is because I want, as we are doing this rabbit trail, for you to smell, hopefully that incense that's back there, that is not what they used in the temple, but it's for one of their temple practices. You're not supposed to reproduce the one that was in the temple. That's really bad. But it's one that they used in their ceremonies. And you can smell that. But the food as well. This is a kosher meal. Not exactly what they would have had, but similar. And I want us to be eating together just like children of Israel did 3 times a year for nearly 400 years. Coming together to literally see what they saw. It's just special. They would come and they would bring their pottery, their plates, their containers that would hold the food. And they would eat as a family and celebrate and repent and worship the Lord. And it was a beautiful time. But they had an idea that we don't carry today. Their idea was, you never take something and use it for a lesser value. Taking their pottery, their plates, and their dishes to go worship the Lord, there was nothing better. There was nothing greater. So what these families would do after every one of these meals is they would eat, and they would take their pottery, and they would break it on the ground and leave it there. Because there's nothing better that that pottery could experience than being in God's presence, celebrating and worshiping Him. 3 times a year. That's a lot. But they did it for 400 years. And that's the reason they found so much pottery here. And the guy literally said, if you guys want to take some pottery, take it. We have all kinds. We have more than we know what to do with. And they literally had buckets where they would do excavations, and they would have buckets full of pottery. Pieces, I mean, almost as big as my hand. Now, I didn't take any of those, because they said you had to have it smaller than your palm, and so most of my pieces are smaller. But I want us to experience what they were doing, eating and celebrating, and what they were seeing when they looked at the tabernacle. So why was the tabernacle built? It's between Exodus 25 and Exodus 40, God gives very specific laws about how they were to build the temple and what to use while doing it. So why did they build it? Well, Exodus chapter 25, verse 8 gives us, well, pretty much the clue. Let them make a sanctuary for me that I may live, or the word, depending on your King James, maybe is dwell among them. The word literally is tabernacle. I want to live with them, so make me a place that I can do it. That's the reason they built the tabernacle. Verse 9, this is how you will make it, according to all that I am showing you, according to the pattern of the tent, and the pattern for all its furnishings. God designed this. Joshua didn't. Neither did Moses. God said, this is exactly what I want. This is how I want it.
He also designed the temple.
That's exactly right. Yep. Now, why did God want this built so specifically? Why do those little details matter? Well, Hebrews chapter 8, verses 1 and 2 tells us. Now, the main point in what we are saying is this. We do not have this kind of high priest who sat down at the right hand of the throne of God, the majesty in heaven, and who serves in the sanctuary, the true tent, set up by the Lord and not by any human. The reason God was so specific about the tabernacle and the temple was because it's a mirror image of what's in heaven.
Exactly right.
He wanted it specifically this way so we would know what to look for when we got there. Kind of a big signpost saying, look here. Okay? This is why he designed it. And this is why he designed it so specifically. But as you read through Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, all those wonderful books that you just love to read through without falling asleep, you find not only was God very specific about how to build the temple and what to use, he also designed their sacrifices very specifically. And boy, if you got the fire wrong, you didn't live through it. Moses' boys didn't. Or, excuse me, I said Moses. Aaron's boys didn't. They did the wrong fire first off, and God killed them. God was why was God specific about the sacrifices? Why does it matter? Why can't they just bring anything? Hebrews chapter 9, verses 23 through 26, and I don't have it here. But the reason is, Jesus is our sacrifice. And he wanted a signpost that pointed to Jesus. I have one sacrifice, and it's Jesus. And I want everything you do to point to him. And when it doesn't, the penalty is death. Not only is it the tabernacle precise, or their sacrifices, also their high priest. Like I said, if you did it wrong, God struck them dead. Because Hebrews chapter 10, verse 19 through 22, and actually right here, chapter 8, there is a specific and single high priest for all humanity, and his name is Jesus. He's the Son of God. And all of the sacrifices, the tabernacle, the temple, and the high priest, all of it point to what he would do on a wooden cross 2,000 years ago for you and for me. All of it points to Jesus. I want to build a case here with some verses that literally transformed my life. After studying these passages, I have never looked at the Bible the same. Matthew chapter 5, verse 17. Jesus says, "Do not think that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I didn't come to destroy them, but to fulfill them. Because I tell you, all of you with certainty that until heaven and earth disappear, not one letter or one stroke of a letter will disappear from the law until everything has been accomplished. So whoever sets aside one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven." If it's the King James, the New King James, it says a jot or a tittle. We would say the dotting of an I or the crossing of a T. Absolutely everything. Every letter, every punctuation mark, God put there for a reason. And not only did he put it there for a reason, they will all be fulfilled. Now think about this. Every dotted I and every crossed T. Every letter written down to be fulfilled. That means when they wrote it down the first time, it was pointing to something that would happen in the future. Sure, it was something that was happening now, but it was literally, every letter was a prophecy about what was to come. If you take this verse and you believe what Jesus says here, because this is Jesus' words, that means everything in the Bible is important. In fact, he goes so far as to say, look at that verse 19. So whoever sets aside one of the least of these commandments, if you decide to take off the dot of an I, or you decide to make it an L instead of a T, you will be considered least in the kingdom of heaven. It's pretty important. It's nearly as severe, not quite as severe because the other was death, but it's nearly as severe as all that he set up with the tabernacle, the sacrifices, and all of its implements that was death. It's almost that severe. Every letter is important. So that's scary enough. But then look at John chapter 5. Jesus is talking to the religious leaders and he's arguing with them. Verse 39, he says, you examine the scriptures carefully because you suppose that in them you have eternal life, yet they testify about me. But you are not willing to come to me to have life. Then you skip down to verse 45, just for lack of time. Do not suppose that I will be the one to accuse you before the Father. Your accuser is Moses, on whom you have set your hope, because if you believed Moses, you would believe me, since he wrote about me. Think about this. We scan the scriptures because we're trying to find eternal life. That's what you and I do on a daily basis, right? But if we miss Jesus in the reading, we didn't read it right. Because every page that Moses wrote was talking about Jesus. It was talking about what he would do. Down to the dotted I and the cross T. If you believe that, that changes how you read the Bible. That changes everything. So what about the tabernacle? How can the tabernacle be about Jesus? Are you really trying to feed me that line, Pastor? Yes, but you don't have to take my words for it. Boy, I sound like LeVar Burton. Never mind, you got to be a Generation X, I guess. John chapter 11, and that's supposed to be verse 14, not 114. Excuse my typing. John chapter 1, verse 14. The Word became flesh and lived among us. We gazed on his glory, the kind of glory that belongs to the Father, uniquely existing Son, who is full of grace and truth. That word lived that we have here, or it's tabernacled in some translations, it literally means pitched his tent. Jesus pitched his tent here on this earth so that we could see him, that we could live with him. Further than that, notice what else it says. And we gazed on his glory, the kind of glory that belongs to the Father's uniquely existing Son. What did they see in the Old Testament surrounding the tabernacle? Fire by day and a cloud by night. In Exodus chapter 40, verse 33 and 34, the presence of God's glory was so strong that they couldn't do anything. When they later on did the temple, and Solomon's doing the temple, the presence of God showed up so much it pushed all the priests out, and they couldn't do their duties. Jesus came down and he pitched his tent with us. He tabernacled with you and me so that we could live with him, see him, and see his glory. A couple weeks ago we were talking in our Corinthians study, right? That Moses put a mask or a veil over his face so that the children of Israel wouldn't see God's glory fading away from his face, right? How did he get that? He was one-on-one with God. Jesus came down. The Word became flesh. John chapter 2, verses 13 through 17. Jesus is cleaning up the temple with a whip. In verse 18, the Jewish leaders asked him, what sign can you show us as authority for doing these things? How dare you? Who gives you the authority to do this? Jesus answered them and said, destroy this sanctuary, and in 3 days I will rebuild it. The Jewish leaders said this sanctuary has been under construction for 46 years and you're going to rebuild it in 3 days? But the sanctuary he was speaking of was his own body. Jesus literally connected with the religious leaders that the tabernacle and the temple were his body. And if you were looking at him, you were looking at him. Or you were looking at it, you were looking at him, if I can say it right. Jesus makes the connection that he is the temple and tabernacle. All right. So let's talk about what was the tabernacle. It was a temporary movable tent. It was the center of all the children of Israel's commerce. Everything took place around the north, the south, the east, and the west. It was the place where God lived with them. He tabernacled with them. He spoke to them. It's where they worshiped him. It's where he protected them. What are the characteristics of the tabernacle? Well, before we get there, there's many times when I'm going to say wood. There was only one wood that was used to build anything that was in the tabernacle. It was called acacia wood. It grows in the Negev. Wandering around the wilderness, that's the Negev. This is the acacia wood. It's the acacia tree. I took it. It's in the area of En-Gedi, where David ran from Saul, or hid from him. It's a unique tree because that's its branches. Can you imagine building the tabernacle, all of its posts, all of its implements, its furniture, whatever, and you got to go through all of the, can you imagine the blood that was spilled by those poor construction workers?
Is it hardwood?
I'm not sure if I think it is a hardwood. But, I mean, notice, by the way, that's not very thick. This is a palm tree. The palm tree's about like this, okay? It's laying down in front of it. That is the acacia tree. It was about like that. I can't imagine trying to get ply out of that, but yeah, you can. This grows naturally everywhere. And many believe that when they made the crown of thorns, it was the acacia that they pulled it off of. And so you can imagine having that as a crown of thorns pressed on your head. And how fitting also, and we don't know that for sure, but how fitting would it be that all of the implements of the tabernacle where the sacrifices were done every year, Jesus would wear as a crown. Man. All right. So if I mentioned wood, that's where it's talking about. All right. So several things to take note. This is what the tabernacle would have looked like, although this wall would have been closed off and it had a roof on it. It's opened up so you can see it, okay? This is what the tabernacle would have looked like. Here's the outer court, okay? There is the holy place, and back here, that you don't see quite correctly, but anyways, it's the Holy of Holies, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. It really does mean the world to me that you're getting a blessing out of it. If this video was a blessing, make sure to hit that thumbs up button for me. That way other people can find it as well. Here in the link section, you'll find playlists and new videos that we put out. We try to do 2 or 3 a week. You can also subscribe to the channel by pressing on my face and then hitting the bell icon, and that will alert you to new videos. May God richly bless you.